Namaste and welcome to our current affairs show with me, Pujita Krishna. In today's episode, I have some breaking news for you and a world exclusive from the UK on a matter that many of you, I'm sure, are aware of. And this is to do with the recent troubling event in Leicester in UK and the subsequent and might I also add that this matter is now being currently investigated by the British authorities. So, to talk us through this incident and what happened subsequently, I have with me a very special guest, Pandit Satish Sharma ji. Namaste. He is, as you all know, a dharmic scholar, Hindu leader, advocate of Hindu rights in the UK, especially, and many other things besides. So it is a delight and an honor, Panditji. Namaste and welcome to the show.
Pujtaji, Pranam, Namaskar, Jai Shri Ram to you. Thank you for that very generous introduction. There are, as you say, some aspects of this latest news in Leicester it's important that we get them out to our audience. It's important that we discuss them so that people understand some of the dynamics of what's going on. So thank you for the opportunity to speak and to talk about this on Chithi Media.
Panditji, I'm going to speak very less today and I will hand over to you. And since you have watched this and observed this incident play out the way it has, and you have a ringside view, I'm sure. So please talk us through what really happened so that this growing rise of or growing instances of Hinduphobia, especially in the UK, so that we as Hindus are able to respond to it as one voice. So over to you, Panditji. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Pujtaji. So if I can just first highlight a couple of the points which are of great concern. One is that whatever it was that happened, the catalyst is also the consequences. Normally, after a period of time, they settle down and the community sits together and has a conversation, and whatever misunderstandings have occurred are addressed, and then tranquility is re-established. That doesn't seem to be happening at this moment in time. I'm a bit concerned that there are attempts to prolong, to continue to incite. And also of great concern for the first time is there are attempts to spin this into a much, much larger rhetoric. A much larger problem is being created. And so I wanted to have an opportunity to dissect it. As you say, firstly, that this is being investigated by the police. And so there are some items where we're not at liberty just yet to disclose them. But I'm going to wind the clock back to when I first heard about this. The first piece of news that I picked up was from Leicester. And the story that I was told was that following a cricket match, there was an altercation. And in that altercation, Hindu lads beat up a Muslim guy, a young man who was also a cricket fan. And as a result of it, both sides engaged in violence on the streets of Leicester. And both sides are now saying, hang on a moment, you threw the first stone, you threw the first punch, etc., etc. So I want to clarify that after having some conversations with people on the ground, with members of the community who were involved, a clearer picture is emerging. So if everybody can just bear in mind the story that had been painted in the first instance as we look at what actually happened. The first thing I established is that this was nothing to do with any cricketing match or any cricketing incident at all. There was no connectivity between the match, whether it was a victory or a defeat for either side, none whatsoever. Further investigation revealed that there had been an altercation in the past, but that altercation had been isolated, it had been limited, and it had actually been sparked off by an individual who took an India flag away from India fans. And so there was a scuffle and the usual jostling that happens sometimes after football matches, occasionally after cricket matches. But that incident was concluded and it was established that the gentleman who had actually taken the flag wasn't even a member of the Muslim community. It seems to have been a gentleman who was from the Sikh community who had had a bit too much to drink, and young men being young men, there was an altercation, but it wasn't of any great significance. So the presence of that as a catalyst is negated. That's not what started this issue. Further investigation then revealed that the first act of inter-community conflict occurred outside of a house where a member of our Hindu community had, they were engaged in Ganesh Chaturthi celebrations. And a small tent had been erected in the garden of the house on private property. A murti had been placed there. Ganeshji's murti had been, it was sthapit there, and puja had started. And the puja was done in the mornings and the evenings, and there was bhajan kirtan and celebrations. The family has Maharashtrian origins, and we know that in Maharashtra, Ganesh Chaturthi is celebrated with a great deal of passion, light, and very, very active bhakti. And so this was being replicated there in this family's home. Near to those premises, there was a masjid, and it would appear that members of the congregation were unhappy at these proceedings. And as a consequence, a van arrived outside of this house. And in the van, there were 5 young men who stepped out, 5 young Muslim boys. And eggs were thrown at the tent. An attempt was made to perhaps target the murti itself. But as a consequence of these eggs being thrown and the puja being attacked, a group of young men who were inside, who were actually participating in the bhajan kirtan, they rushed out to see what was going on. They identified the 5 assailants. The van immediately fled. 4 of the assailants fled as well when they saw a large number of young men emerging. One of them was apprehended. The group managed to confine him, and there was a scuffle which ensued. I'm not going to go into any more detail, but the young man was sent to hospital to be checked up and everything else, and his injuries and so on are being established. But it's not been publicized by anybody as having been a serious assault or anything like that at this moment in time. The police were involved, community leaders engaged with both parties, and the group of young Hindus were also interviewed. And they were asked the questions of what had happened and who had it been who engaged in the altercation. And it was quite an open and frank conversation. Evidence was exchanged. And the police asked for the community, the Hindu community, to actually become tranquil and please remain indoors for the next couple of days. We do not want this to escalate, and we'll do everything we can. So the police responded in the manner that was appropriate. The Hindu community complied. Nothing actually happened. The following day, there wasn't much of a noise. But on the evening afterwards, what then happened was a large number of Muslim young men came into the area. And you may have seen there are multiple
Yes.
videos. And what actually happened was that property was attacked and individuals attacked. A young man was attacked with a knife. Fortunately, he didn't sustain any injuries. His aunt, who was trying to intervene, she had a blow to her face and she was hurt a little, but thankfully hasn't been particularly harmed. Doors were kicked in, doors of Hindu homes were kicked in. Any indication that a Hindu lives in a particular home, whether it was a dhwaj or whether it was an orange flag, as is associated with Sanatani traditions, a saffron flag, some of those were taken away, they were damaged and torn down. And I must say that at this moment, the response from the community has also been to remove all vestiges. Anything that would indicate that it's a Hindu house have now been removed from the front. So property was injured, doors were kicked in. The police again engaged with the community and reinforced the idea to our Sanatani community, the Hindu community, that they mustn't escalate the issue. So again, they remained indoors. And the police then deployed drones the following day to take images and capture images of all the perpetrators of the violence. And the following evening, equally, there were very large numbers, and we have seen quite troubling videos where the police were then targeted with abuse and physical violence. But even more drone footage was taken. On the third day, the announcement came that arrests were now being made, and some 23 arrests were announced. And I think it was the announcement of the arrest that suddenly dampened the whole issue back down again. And so nobody appeared on the fourth evening at all. It was completely settled and contained. So that's a brief chronology of what happened and the
Right.
sequence of events.
Right.
Subsequent to that, though, we have seen a parallel campaign being run, and this is of greater concern to me. In every community, there are often people who are very, shall we say, rajsic. They're very passionate and on occasion overly ebullient, occasionally overly aggressive and assertive. And they can be incited to perform an act of violence without giving too much thought. At a particular age, we all know that blood is hot, and perhaps too much Josh and not enough Hosh is
Correct.
associated with that age. And so it's important that the elders of all communities work to ensure that our young men who are perhaps vulnerable to being incited are not incited.
Mm.
They are the first casualties. They're the ones whose lives get destroyed. They're the ones whose careers become tarnished. They're the ones who acquire criminal records. Why would one incite the young members of our communities and cause them such harm?
Mm.
But that seems to be happening. What we have now seen and witnessed is a parallel propaganda campaign. And I want to touch base on the propaganda campaign because this is very, very important. It's very easy to spot factual reporting and as opposed to propaganda and incitement. And here are some of the ways in which you can identify it. Firstly, there has been a huge Twitter campaign targeting the Hindu community in Leicester, claiming that they were Hindutva thugs.
Mm.
Now, even those who um, are not particularly well informed, but very anti the Indian civilization, they have the notion that Hindutva is a political ideology. This is the thought that they've been spreading and perpetuating. And so the question arises, how did they know that these young men had a particular political ideology? Where's the evidence to support that these are Hindutva thugs? Where is the evidence to support that these were fascist thugs? Where's the evidence to support that they were far-right extremists? The slur of Nazi has been thrown in. Okay, we've had the usual Hinduphobic, anti-Hindu, Hindumisic tropes thrown about: cow urine drinkers, and all of that sort of nonsense. So whenever these are thrown, it's crystal clear that we are witnessing a propaganda exercise, an
Mm.
attempt to incite as opposed to provide factual information. And that has been noticeable. It's been noticeable that it's in volume, in terms of how many tweets, in terms of how many little memes have been made and videos have been made.
True.
So the vast majority of the reporting that covers this issue is actually of that sort. And so it is propaganda. My
Mm.
concern is, who is it targeted at? There are
Mm.
two audiences. One is obviously the young men who I've spoken about, who are easily triggerable, and
Mm.
they exist in the Muslim community as they do in other communities. And so they, I feel, to some degree, are being incited. And that's
Mhm.
a problem, and we really hope the authorities take notice of this. The other audience is our own community. If you have um, a deluge of information or propaganda masquerading as information, then it's going to draw a response from our own community as well. They too will become fearful. They too
Mm.
will become outraged because they know the difference on the ground was totally, it was a different story. And so they will become vulnerable to being incited. And that is something we also want the authorities to be concerned about. And on that note, I would just shout out to the members of our community who will be watching, please do not be so foolish as to fall foul of such a elementary, unsophisticated attempt to
Mm.
create a problem where there isn't a problem. I would hope that our community, the wisdom that we're associated with, the tranquility that we're associated with, the aversion to violence that we're associated with, are all borne in mind, and we do not allow anybody in our community to become triggered. The last audience, which is also of great concern to me, is the uninformed majority audience who really don't know too much about any of the communities. They don't know too much about
True.
the Hindu community or the Muslim community. And so, to a large degree, they are vulnerable to being informed or misinformed because of the
Mm.
volume of the propaganda that's being pushed out there. And so, we do not want to do anything to,
Mm.
shall we say, reinforce any impressions that they may have incorrectly received. Now, this whole area is one of really vital importance. We all know propaganda is something that is seeded, it seeds hatred over a period of time. Gradually, it accumulates, it gathers momentum, and then at some point in time, something occurs to trigger it
mm,
off. And then when violence occurs, the majority of people who are observing, they've already been prepared, and in their own minds, they would automatically justify that violence and say, well, that was expected. We knew what they were like. They
mm,
deserved it. All of that sort of victim shaming
mm,
happens without people
mm,
knowing that that's
mm,
what they're doing. Now, this area is an area where we have to get the authorities to understand what's doing and accept what's doing. And so we're going to do a bit of work with the community to make sure they understand how to keep the appropriate records, how to log data, how to
mm,
actually understand what's being done, and to respond to it in a very mature and stable manner, which is the need of the hour. So we will be calling a community meeting. We'll probably do it online and invite the leading members of the community to contribute their understanding. And then my intention is to hold a much, much larger, almost a convention, to convene a much larger meeting online, at which point we will have contributions from the police, we'll have contributions from local leaders, and we will try and make sure that if there are any gaps in the way in which the authorities perceive what is happening, then we can contribute towards removing those gaps so that everybody has a complete understanding. And
mm.
with your approval and your support, hopefully we can use Jithi Media to distribute and disseminate that knowledge. So that's
Yeah.
a rough snapshot of what has happened. Um, Back to you, Pujithati.
Yes. Very, very interesting, and as usual, so beautifully, you know, explained by you, Panditji.
Very kind.
So my question, I mean, I have a couple of questions as you were speaking, and these were just thoughts that came to me. One, how did this even play out as a Hindu Muslim, as in a, India, Pakistan? How did that even happen when you clearly mentioned that this has nothing to do with the Muslim angle at all?
Yeah.
Um, how did that happen? And secondly, I think a tag question to that would be that when such things happen, like in the case of what the true genesis of this incident is, what you said is the Ganesh Chaturthi festivities that were going on, and the attack on the residents. What is their recourse to? Who do they turn to? The authorities, yes, but is there some sort of an ecosystem that in the UK, in places where probably the Muslim community is in large numbers, who do they turn to?
Wonderful.
Two
So
questions.
two very perceptive questions. Thank you. They're excellent and to be brought in front of our audience. The first
Right.
thing is that we have a very large Gujarati Muslim community in Leicester as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Gujarati Muslims who are from India who would be hypothetically supporting India in a cricket match. They wouldn't be supporting Pakistan.
Interesting. Mm.
Mix. So in
Mm.
that scenario, the question then arises, how on earth did these commentators determine that it's a Hindu-Muslim issue?
Exactly.
Right? And this is a key point which the police should be taking on board and
Mm.
recognizing and maybe even using it as a filter to
Mm.
determine what is inciting
Exciting.
propaganda. And that would be a very big issue.
Mm.
Nobody on the Hindu community side, nobody on the India cricketing side or in the residents of that community has spun this with a Hindu Muslim angle. That has
Mm.
not come from the community. And so there is clearly a mischief maker
Correct.
present. Now, this mischief maker has access to a very well established, as we are now seeing the evidence for it, ecosystem. And
Mm.
this ecosystem seems to have actually kicked off even prior to any evidence having been gathered. We
Absolutely.
saw prominent Muslim Twitter handles immediately alleging that these were Hindutva thugs without any evidence whatsoever. We saw prominent anti India journalists also tweeting the same trope. And there is a little bit of an ecosystem in our community.
Mm.
But there is something I want to highlight for our own community. Why does one need an ecosystem?
Mm.
In this country, we have a principle of policing by consent, right? The community has given up its right, its natural right to bear arms in its own self-defense. We have given that to the authorities
mm,
and entitled and empowered them to use force on our behalf. And the other side of it is that they then accept the responsibility of protection.
mm,
Now, if that's the case, why do we need an ecosystem? The Hindu community is known for not needing an ecosystem because it integrates so well wherever it goes.
correct.
You know, I often say that if you look at the human family globally as a body, we are like stem cells. You know, wherever you go, you'll find Hindus will look and think, the medical system's not very good here. And suddenly our community is producing lots and lots of doctors and physicians,
True.
educationalists, finance, entrepreneurs. You know, we are economy builders.
Hmm.
So why do we need an ecosystem to protect ourselves? It's an unnatural task. When there is harmony, when there is cohesion between communities, communities don't need an ecosystem
Mm,
until they are attacked. And so we are in that stage where it's become apparent increasingly to more and more Hindus that in fact being tranquil, being completely integrated is not enough, because there is obviously somebody, some group, some element, some constituency implementing policies and propaganda campaigns which are creating a hostile environment for us.
right.
So, in answer to the question about an ecosystem, there is a rudimentary ecosystem which was really created to support our community's social and pastoral, temporal, and spiritual needs, but not to provide security, not
Mm,
to be able to have a mechanism available on tap to be able to respond to these issues. So we're in the process now of sculpting and creating that. If I can again use my analogy of a body,
mm,
a healthy body is tranquil.
mm,
It is in a position of stability, of contentment. And it's only when it's attacked that the immune system kicks in. When it's physically attacked, you know, we have a nervous system which triggers a whole sequence of fight and flight instincts. If we're attacked by a virus, an immune system kicks into play. But in the absence of a threat, it's natural for the body and for a family and for a community to be tranquil and not need to be able to defend itself. So
true.
this ecosystem is certainly the need of the hour. The community must reconfigure its resources to be able to support the creation of its own ecosystem so that it can respond in an adequate manner to restore tranquility, to identify who the troublesome elements are within our own community and other communities, and ensure that the authorities can then act and deal with them. This ecosystem is the need of the hour, and I think that's something more and more people are becoming aware of.
Yes. Panditji, what happened in Leicester in the UK? I mean, if one really thinks about it, it's not exclusive, or it's not exclusive to to UK perhaps, or Leicester. If one looks around globally, the incidents, the instances of Hindu phobia are on the rise. You may recall what happened recently in, I think it was in Dallas, I think in the US, where
Yes.
a group of Indian women were verbally attacked by a lady of Mexican origin, but American nevertheless. And while it wasn't violent, but her mannerisms, her language, everything was far from cordial. So. And many such instances that one has known of, or found, recent occasion one has read about. So why do you think this is happening? Do you think it has always been happening and it was not reported? Is it because there is there's social media, there is so much awareness these days that people are putting all these things out, people are, they have a phone, so it's very easy to take a video. What would you put this down to?
Mm. Mm. Again, on the money, as they say in America. So firstly, if I can just place it in one context, the Sanatani understanding is that a human being is born as Paramatma ka ansh, yeah, as a drop of divinity from the ocean of divinity,
Right.
and is a good thing. the human being appears on this earth, and it's a good event, and the earth is a good place. When everything is operating in a dharmic fashion, it has harmony, and the experience of being in existence is an amazing experience. So hate is unnatural. Hate is not something that is intrinsic to us. But for hate to appear in the mind's person, it has to be seeded. It has to be seeded, it has to be nourished, it has to be watered, and then when it bears fruit, that fruit is harvested. So even the fruits of hatred are harvested. Now it's natural that human beings, there is a suspicion when it comes to difference. We know this. But that suspicion is not coordinated. Any trepidation that is experienced when you're meeting somebody who is totally different, it's a natural expression, it's a natural experience. But as I said, it's not being curated, it's not being organized, it's not being directed. What we are witnessing, though, is a manifestation of organized hatred, institutionalized hatred. And this mechanism for inspiring hatred of Hindus, as you have so rightly pointed, is now we are seeing its effect across the globe. Why is this happening? This is something that we have to really understand. And I've done a great deal of work on this already. And at the appropriate time and in the appropriate manner, I think we should probably explore this.
Right.
There is a phenomenon that we noticed on the streets of Leicester, though, which I will talk about, which is an indication of how this is done. So there is video evidence of slurs being directed at those Hindu homes and the Hindu community. The word mushrik is being used. And that is a very specific word. In fact, that word conforms to the legal definition of hate speech.
Right.
Okay? It corresponds to the legal definition of hate speech, and its use is therefore hate, it's incitement to hatred. And any crime that is committed by an individual who is fueled by that sort of hatred becomes a hate crime. And so the presence of that word and that ideology and that hatred on the streets of Leicester says to me that those young men had had hatred seeded in their hearts. And what we saw was that hatred manifesting on the streets of Leicester. And the tragedy is that those young men have probably got no idea that once upon a time they too were born as divine beings, as people, children, as beings needing to explore, find love, be in a state of happiness, to enjoy the experience. Somewhere along the line, hatred was seeded, and then it was given form. It's been nurtured, and we saw the harvest starting on the streets of Leicester. So if we understand that this is, broadly speaking, the process that we're witnessing, Hindus then are in a better position to be able to understand how to respond to it. And the response to it, from a dharmic point of view, is the subject for a much, much larger engagement.
I agree. That is true. Because it's not an isolated incident. And
Correct.
I fear that, um, not that I want to be pessimistic, but I do fear that these instances are probably on the rise. We've not seen the last of it. So, yes, it is very important that we arm ourselves, not maybe, I don't mean it in the sense of aggression, but definitely in because the war is happening at different levels, and one of which is information war. So that is definitely a very important point that you mentioned, that we need to work on building our own side of things. So
Pujitaji, I'm sorry, can I just interrupt for a moment? Forgive the rudeness, but you've just triggered a very important thought which was connected to what we were talking about. And I'd just like to put that out there as well.
yes.
In information warfare and propaganda warfare, there is an entity called a useful idiot. And a useful idiot is a person who can be motivated and manipulated to perform acts which benefit you at their own expense without them even sort of knowing what it is. And this is not something new that I'm sharing with you. This is acknowledged by those who understand how education should work, who understand how conditioning and programming of people's work. And so this idea of useful idiots is a really useful one for us to consider. We do not want any of our
mm,
young people to become useful idiots.
mm,
If you want to have power, then one of the ways in which you can accumulate that power is to find vulnerable, innocent people who are not aware of history, who have not yet attained emotional maturity, trigger them, and then wind them up like a clock and direct them, becoming useful idiots. And an extreme example of that, that poor young man who took a boat and wanted to land on that remote island in the Indian Ocean, despite the desires of everybody else. That's an example of a useful idiot. That poor man sacrificed his own life to a bunch of ideas that he hadn't had the opportunity to scrutinize, that he
true.
didn't have an understanding. And yet, look at his actions, entirely irrational, fueled by emotion, to his own terrible detriment. And so we have to make sure that if there are people in our communities who are creating useful idiots for no other purpose than to attain power, authority, and control, then they should be identified. We have to
Yes.
make our young people immune to being radicalized in this manner. And when I say our people, I'm not talking about just our Hindu people. I'm talking about our young people in Bharat and in England and in other countries as well. Thank you for the chance to just share that.
Right, absolutely, Panditji. I agree with you. Although I am a bit of a skeptic. I'm just wondering, do you think that is even possible when you speak of our brothers from the other camp? Not that I want to make any divisions, but you said that we need to. Haven't they been already radicalized to the extent that it seems that they've reached a point of no return? Am I being too bold in saying that?
I think there is a point of no return. I don't believe that there is a place a person cannot be brought back from,
Okay.
but practically it's virtually impossible, because in order to bring back a person from some places of incredible darkness, you have to first confine them, limit their capacity to harm themselves, limit their capacity to harm other people, and then engage with them. Remember, we are the tradition, right?
Mm,
We have the processes and the understanding to actually deconstruct every element of our own identity and then rebuild it. Adi Shankaracharya ji in his Nirvan Shatkam, Mano Buddha Ahankara Chittani Naham,
mm,
right? He has said, what I am is none of these things. And
mm.
radicalization occurs in those places and those spaces. And
Right.
so we do have the knowledge to be able to do this. And so I'm really confident that in the due course of time, when our ecosystem matures, when we have the opportunity to be able to speak
Mm,
in the appropriate fora, we can diffuse this hatred. We
mm-hmm.
can reconnect people with their innate divinity. We can remind them of what an amazing thing it is to be a human being and to exist in this world. That is what our
Right.
responsibility is, right? If those who understand what
Yes.
dharma is are not up to this task, तो और कौन बचाएगा?
Very true. Very true. So, Pandit, on that note, I think we'll conclude this episode of the Current Affairs show. I think you've as far as I'm concerned, talking to you has kind of filled me with some hope that things aren't entirely lost yet, and perhaps there is reason to believe that things can change for the better. And I think we will talk again about what happened in Leicester, because things are still unraveling as we speak. The authorities are investigating this matter, so we will meet again very soon and take this conversation further, Panditji. um,
Thank you so much, Pujitaji. If I can just remind everybody that we are going to be holding these public meetings, and they will be held online. And so
mhm,
I had a conversation with the powers that be at Jithi Media, and they were very happy for us to put a link in the description where people can register for more information about this. I'm also going to seize the opportunity, as all of the most dynamic young influencers on YouTube and Twitter do, and suggest that if anybody wants to have information via Twitter or anything else, can they please follow Chithi Media? Can they please follow Festival of Bharat? and can they please follow the British Hindu, which is my Twitter handle, and we will
Yes.
make sure that we inform them of what's happening. And let's all get involved in this process. It's a great piece of work to be doing together, and
Yes.
all it requires is for us to come together and do this now. Thank you very much, Pujitaji. Much appreciated. Jai
Thank you
Shri
so much,
Ram. Jai Shri
Panditji. Jai Shri Ram. Jai Shri Ram. Until next time. To all our viewers, thank you for joining in today. And like Panditji pointed out, please do follow his handle, the great work that he's doing for the Hindus in the community or in the British, the UK community, as well as around the world. And do follow us and do subscribe to us. And please do come back. Namaste.
Namaste. Jai Shri Ram.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.